but I am so happy to be here with you this afternoon. I'm so glad you realized that it was actually 2 p.m. and not 7 p.m. like everything we do. Welcome to our first racial justice, I've been calling it Talk About Justice speaker series for Govans Ministry, Racial Justice Ministry. We are just so honored to have with us today Petula Caesar. We call her Tula because she's a friend of the family. I know some great folks. How did that all work out? I'm just so blessed. Tula has written an award-winning book, which she is going to talk about today and talk about the issues of colorism around it. I am now going to turn it over to one of our new members of our new Racial Justice Ministry working group, Miss Layla Ali. I'm so excited about Layla. Layla, and thank God for Layla's wellness too. Amen. Layla, it's your turn, girl.
Yay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a part of this. And I'm so absolutely honored and excited to have Miss Petula on. And I was a huge fan of her book. And I thought it would be a great session to have. I just wanted to tell everyone, if you have a question, please put it in the chat. And you can do that during the session. You don't have to wait until the end. You can do that during the session. And I will direct the question to Miss Petula as we go along. I do have some questions that I am planning to ask her to help, I like to say, stir the pot, but stir it nicely, but get the conversation going. So feel free to chime in and learn as much as you can. We're all here learning and supporting each other, and I'm just grateful for this opportunity. So
let me one more thing. We would really like to thank our artists who participate in all of our events, totally volunteer their time and expertise. We make sure that we have a tip jar available for them if you would like to donate to and bless them any way that you can. And that means that their PayPal or whatever is going to be listed in the chat several times throughout. All right, there you go. Ask away, Layla. Welcome, Tula.
Hey, and thank you everyone for coming out. I appreciate you and I appreciate the support. And I hope that you'll enjoy the conversation that we're about to have.
Yay, thank you so much for coming on with us and for sharing your skills with us. I just want to show everyone I have an autographed copy of her book, and I have Chris and Wendy to thank for it because I was not able to get to Miss Petula's session at Enoch Pratt Library. See, I was a fan for a long time.
That still amazes me.
They got me an autographed copy. They went to her session at, so you have a lot of Govans fans here. I wanted to start a little general and ask you, can you tell us what you think colorism is? Isn't that just racism? How is it different from racism? What is colorism? That if I had no clue whatsoever what you were talking about, how could you help me understand it?
Okay, so colorism, like everything that is connected to racism, has layers to it. So if we start with a very general definition, I feel like Alice Walker has the best, she nailed it very succinctly. She says, colorism is prejudicial or preferential treatment of same race people based solely on their skin color. And to me, that really kind of wraps up in a nutshell what colorism is. So if you start there with the idea that among a race of people, there's a spectrum of skin colors that are all part of that race, that within that spectrum, there are levels of preference in that race that is based first on skin color, then some other things start to come into play, like hair texture, like your ability to kind of mimic what I'll call majority culture and that sort of thing. But the sort of core foundational thing that colorism is built on is skin complexion. And that kind of manifests itself in two ways. Skin complexion, because we all kind of start noticing those differences in our families. So skin complexion as it plays out within your family. Within Black families, it's very common for there to be a range of skin complexions within the family. And oftentimes colorism starts to play itself out there, where there may be some distinctions made between how different complected people in the family are treated. Then you go to the outside world and you interact with other races, because I found in my years of living, oftentimes people who are not Black are not necessarily aware of how this plays out among Black folks. Although they still, I have found have some unconscious bias and preference for light-skinned Black people that they probably aren't aware of. So it starts with the preferential treatment of lighter skinned people, and then it kind of gets more complicated from there.
Okay. So what made you want to write a book about it?
Well, because I had certainly read a number of books about the subject of colorism over the years, really just sort of trying to unpack my own baggage around this. My dad was a very, very light-skinned Black man, light-skinned, straight-haired. He could accomplish what is called passing, which meant that if he had wanted to, he could have gone out into the world, and for folks who did not know him, he could have presented himself as white. That would have been very beneficial for him, particularly in the early 1920s when he was born and when he lived. And he grew up in a very small coal mining town in Jenkins Jones, West Virginia. I defy you to find it on the map. I just wrote it. In that coal mining town, Black people who were leaving the South, leaving sharecropping and those types of situations, they went to the coal mines to find financial security. They found it in those coal mines. It was very dangerous work, but it paid pretty well. And because of that, Black communities grew up and started to be born around those coal mines. My dad lived in one of these towns. The only work for him was going to be in the coal mines, but he recognized very early, because he was light-skinned, because he appeared white, and because there were some rumors in the town that perhaps his father was white, no one really said for sure. The white men in the town, who kind of dictated all the economics of the town, kind of made sure my dad didn't have to go into the mines. Because of that, my dad got to work in the post office. My dad got to work in the office of the coal mining company. Because of that, he made more money. Because of that, he was able to take care of his family. Because of that, he was able to marry and move to the North and get some education. Because of that, he was able to get a better job in the North. Because of that, he was able to have a kind of economic stability that he passed on to his family, strictly because essentially he was light-skinned. That was all there was to it. He could have been the exact same person, darker skinned, and the presumption would have been, you're going to go work in the mines and maybe you'll come out and be okay, or maybe you'll get Black lung and die. We'll just see, but good luck to you. Because of that, he was able to create a kind of economic stability that benefited me tremendously. There are all kinds of things that did not happen to me because I was able to grow up in an economically stable household. But because my dad had that experience, he believed the only way for me to be successful in the world was to do exactly what he did, which was to be as white as possible. And that was a struggle for me, even when I didn't know why. I did not like the idea that there was just something inherently wrong with me. Like I got to this earth and I just got here, and all you people, including my family, are telling me how I am is problematic. So I already need to do all these things to make myself okay or acceptable. And even when I didn't know why, I just didn't like that idea. So when I came to adulthood and started unpacking, we all spend a good portion of our lives getting over our childhoods. Writing this book at the time was cheaper than therapy. Writing the book actually sent me to therapy, So it is a better book now because I went to therapy. But ultimately, I knew that my experience wasn't the only experience like this. A lot of the books I've read on the subject look at it from a very academic kind of standpoint, and I think that's good. But I really wanted to tell my personal story about how I experienced this particular thing, colorism.
Thank you, Ms. Petula. I have some questions from the audience. That I'm going to try to segue into another discussion. There's still a little bit of confusion about why colorism isn't racism. Why isn't it the exact same thing? Like what makes colorism different from racism? And how does that relate to a broader, even international audience? Because we do see colorism, people who are not of the African diaspora do experience colorism, and people within the African diaspora experience colorism differently depending on what country they're in. So I think that's really two questions in one, but I'm seeing a lot of that in my chat, and just some clarity there we would love to hear about it.
Okay. Is there a difference between colorism and racism? I would say colorism is one of the ways in which racism operates. Okay, so if racism is driving the car, colorism is in the car, going kind of riding along with racism, and colorism is one of the ways in which racism does its work. So there are certainly lots of other ways that racism does its work, but one of the ways is colorism. Anytime you set up essentially a hierarchy of preference in any group, you're going to create a lot of infighting. You're going to create a lot of just oppressive behavior, because whoever sits at the top of that hierarchy, in some cases, is going to feel entitled to some advantages. Unfortunately, that seems to be human nature. So colorism is one of the ways in which racism operates. So it's a type of racism, I guess I would say. And certainly looking at broader groups of folks, pretty much everywhere in the world where colonization impacted the indigenous people of that land, and the end result was a wide spectrum of colors within a race, within an ethnic group, you find this thing. And it is interesting, no matter how far you go away from America, if you have a group of folks that are all different colors, somehow the lighter skinned folks end up with preference, no matter where you go. Certainly in lots of parts of the world, bleaching creams are a multi-billion with a B dollar business, where people really feel like it is advantageous for them to turn their skins a different color because they feel that would allow them to operate in the world more successfully, differently. One of the things that I say just about racism, which kind of comes out of the myth of white supremacy is so powerful, you don't have to be white to gain the benefit of it. You can be like white. You can be light skinned. You can have straight hair. If you speak fluent white, as my friends like to say, there are benefits to it. That's just how powerful it is. It can work to your advantage even if you aren't white. It's certainly, for better or worse, worked to my advantage over the years. And it really, I guess, is particularly troubling for me because I had hoped that after all this time, this conversation really wouldn't be necessary, like my book wouldn't really be necessary. But I've had kids as young as 12 years old in some of my speaking events at Pratt Library who tell me the most horrible things about what other children and sometimes adults say to them about their skin color and their other physical features. So unfortunately, we still need to do this work.
We definitely still need to do this work. As I say, when I had my daughter, I was told that I need to put a clothespin on her nose because it was too wide. you know, like baby just born already being picked on for having a wide African nose, you know, like, so I'm seeing in the chat again, very interesting question about who do you think is reading your book, or who do you know is reading your book? Do you think more Black or white people are reading your book? How do we get your message to a broader audience? Because clearly it needs to go everywhere. This is not, I mean, it is particularly an African diaspora problem, but it is not only an African diaspora problem. And your book has such a powerful and important message that everybody needs to hear. How do we get the message out there?
Okay, to answer the first question about who is reading my book. So I took the Toni Morrison approach to writing this book. I think anytime a Black person writes a book, you kind of have to make a decision about who the book is for and who the book isn't for, if that's how you want to think about it. So I had to be clear within myself that I was writing this book to the Black community that I am a part of. But I also had to recognize that there was certainly a wider community that does participate in this and don't necessarily realize it. So my thought was that Black people would be my primary audience, and then there would be other secondary audiences that would come along. That was my thinking. But what I found is that when I've gone out to do talks about the book, that my audiences are typically pretty balanced. They're about the equal number of Black folks and white folks and a few other folks, which I found interesting because I just wasn't expecting that. When I talk to people, to white people particularly, about the book and about colorism, what I have found is that they are completely unaware of the fact that people are being taught to be like them, or that the thing from where Black people sit, the ways in which they operate in the world, the power, the influence, the wealth that they seem to have from our perspective are the things that we want. So we mimic them as best we can in many parts of our community. And I found a lot of people really, white people really found that shocking, the idea that they were the standard, the idea that someone was aspiring to be like them. They were just, I'm a very regular person and I have problems and I have struggles and I have whatever. But that's not what we see when we look at whiteness. So a lot of them really found that shocking, that they were sort of being held up as the norm, as the goal, as the thing to aspire to be like. As far as getting my message out further, part of this is kind of an internal discussion that Black folks need to have within our own community, because, you know, we do a lot of damage to each other as we try to figure out how to work through our own stuff. So there's that piece of the conversation. But then the larger part of the conversation ultimately is about the myth of white supremacy. The idea that I find there are some white people who don't necessarily believe that it really impacts Black people the way it does, that it really just kind of permeates a lot of our existences. And it really does. And this is just kind of an example of that. So for Black folks, just really having a clearing out conversation about how we can do better and treat each other with a little more compassion. And for the larger community, just a real understanding that the myth of white supremacy, you know, definitely does all kinds of damage that you can't even imagine. And this is an example of that.
Thank you so much for explaining that. I want to move on a little bit. I have some more very interesting and important questions in the chat that can lead us in a little bit different direction, but are directly from your book.
Okay.
I have a question about your experiences with your white roommate at Towson University. And
Yeah.
I want to kind of, along with that question, the person asking that question just wants to know how you process that, how you are dealing with that. But also I want to present the other side, because I think you touched on that just now, that you had some negative experiences with darker skinned people.
Yes.
You know, so again, that internal within the race, if we want to define race as colors of people, or
Right.
what we've developed as a system of stratification, which is basically what it is. There's the issue of discrimination because, well, I'm dark skinned and I get treated poorly all the time, and you're light skinned and you must think you're all that. So guess what? I'm going to treat you pretty badly. And then there's the, well, you look white, so why not just get over it? You're about as light as I am. So, you know, like, why do you insist on telling people you're Black? Just don't tell them, you know?
That was definitely my dad's perspective. That was my dad's feeling about it.
Could you explain how you process dealing with the colorism face to face with your Towson University roommate, and with darker skinned people who, you know, might treat you poorly because they get treated poorly all the time, and guess what? Now it's my turn to treat you poorly.
Right. Just to quickly summarize the Towson incident for those who may not know, I went to Towson University. I did not want to go there. I wanted to go to Howard. I'd been accepted to Howard. I had a dorm assignment and senior buddy and everything. And my dad told me I should not go to an HBCU because they don't educate as well as a private white school would. And it was just an inferior educational experience. And I foolishly listened to him and went to Towson. And I lived on campus, and I had a roommate, young white woman who grew up on the Jersey Shore in a very tiny town. And we were best friends until she discovered I was not white, which I found shocking because I had never, to my knowledge, fooled anyone in that aspect. But she found out I was Black when the Black guy I was dating at the time came to visit, and we had an awkward conversation about when she asked how my parents felt about me dating a Black guy. And I was like, well, why would they care? And then it was weird for a minute, and then it was like, oh my God, you, and I actually had to say the words, I am not white, which I've never had to say in my life. She got mad. She said I deceived her. We had gotten very close. We had been borrowing each other's clothes and all those college roommate things. She immediately took possession of all the stuff I'd borrowed, and I borrowed some makeup from her, and she grabbed this foundation that I borrowed, and she said very snidely, I can't believe a Black girl wears the same color foundation as me. So I left Towson maybe not even a week after that. I didn't even formally withdraw at the time. I just sort of left. It was right before Thanksgiving, thankfully. So I left early to go home for Thanksgiving. Already in my mind, I was like, I'm not coming back here. And yeah, as fate would have it, for those of you who read the book, my dad took ill right at Thanksgiving. So that was my excuse to withdraw from Towson formally. My processing of it, I wanted to know what I did wrong. It did cross my mind that perhaps I had presented myself in an inauthentic manner, because Black people are kind of trained to be a particular way in the company of whites, to be a way that makes them comfortable, because myth and folklore would have it that we are very loud and aggressive and confrontational and angry and difficult. So Black folks oftentimes sort of are a little calmer and gentler and no sudden moves, that kind of thing, making sure whites are comfortable, because when you're in the space with white people, their comfort keeps you safe. If they're not feeling safe, it's going to be a problem for you. And that even applies to me. So I wondered if I had done that, had I presented myself in a way that she could be comfortable with, that led her to believe that I was white. So I really took a lot of the burden on myself at the time. I was like, okay, what did I do? Why did I? So when it happened, I felt it was my fault entirely. And of course, she just reached very natural conclusions. So I really took the full burden of that. So my beginning of processing that was me basically beating myself up for a few years. So I did get to a better place with it, but in the beginning, it was like, it's me, it's me, it's me. I did this. I should have played rap music in the dorm. I don't know what I should have done, but I should have done something to signal I was not what she thought I was.
You were supposed to act Black.
Yes.
Whatever that means.
Whatever that meant, which I wasn't sure at the time. I thought kind of being Black, just whatever you do when you're Black is acting Black, but no. So I was very confused. So I went home and tried to figure that out. As far as darker skinned Black people and how they feel about me in all my years of living, which I won't say exactly how many, but a lot, I can at this point, and I feel pretty confident in my abilities, I can kind of sense when darker skinned Black people are not particularly comfortable with me. It's just, I can just kind of tell. I'm certainly at the stage of my life where I do not take it personally. The thing I have to remember is that I see representation that kind of sort of resembles me in the world in a way that darker skinned Black people are just starting to see recently. Even if those things weren't intended for me, and I get that this is kind of like getting secondhand clothes, I get kind of secondhand acknowledgement. There at least is something that I can kind of see myself in, and darker skinned Black people didn't have that. I certainly understand completely that my experience as a Black person is very different growing up than someone who was a different skin complexion. I understand that, I do. I have to remember that sometimes though, because when I do have those instances where I can tell someone who's darker skinned is feeling me out, trying to see if I'm one of those snobby, arrogant ones, trying to see if I know my hair is really kinky, or just trying to feel me out in general, I have to allow them to have that process because I get it. And who knows what experiences they had before they got to me. So at this point, I'm prepared. I'm pretty good at not taking a lot of that personally. When I was younger, obviously, I was not, because I just didn't understand, and like all young folks, I just wanted people to like me, and I just wanted to figure out what I was supposed to do in the world. And these other burdens, that's what they felt like. They just felt like burdens. But burdens are part of the human experience. So I had to figure that out.
I'm sorry that you had to figure that out, but you're right. Burdens are part of the human experience, but we can certainly all work harder to not burden each other as much. Right. And this is a part of the process of learning to not burden each other as much. Right. Or make the burdens on each other lighter, Let's see. I've had a question about being able to go outside and enjoy yourself. How does colorism work with just going out in the sun? It might sound like something that is pretty basic, like go out and play, have a good time. Why not, right? I'm gonna roll that question in with my question about, is colorism harder on females? Because now we're talking about a beauty issue, okay? Are females not allowed to go out and play and get dark skinned, and lighter skinned males are? Is there? What's talk to me about beauty.
Okay, so these are the rules, or the rules as they existed when I came to this party. Okay, you do not go out in the sun. Black people you just don't. Even me, who probably needed to go out in the sun sometime, but just no, because you're going to get black. I remember very well the first time I was told to come in the house because my parents did not want to be out in the sun, want me out in the sun, and I had no idea why, because you get this edict, and of course you get no explanation. It's like, don't go outside. When they would tell me, I was kind of scared at first. I'm like, well, what's out there? Why can't I go? So that's the first thing. You don't go out in the sun. And one of the reasons you don't go out is because if you go outside, you're staying outside, and there's no going back and forth, letting the cold air out of the house. So if you go out, you're out there for 12, 16 hours, or until you go back in. So mostly you just don't go, because whatever complexion you are, you don't want to get darker. And my parents certainly did not want me to get darker, because I had won like the complexion lotto or something. So there was always a lot of don't go outside. My parents were so adamant about me not going outside, they let my friends come in the house to play with me, which is unheard of in Black community. You don't let your little friends up in here. This is not, but my parents were committed. They actually took a room in the house and put all my toys and stuff in that room, and they let my raggedy friends, as they would call them sometimes, come into the house in the cool air and let them play in the house, in my playroom. It was like, just for the neighborhood, when they kind of heard I had a playroom with like toys in it, it just kind of made me just another level of bougie and they would like give them snacks and things, but that's how committed they were to me not going outside, because I wanted to go outside with my friends, and they would rather take the chance of having my raggedy friends tear up their house rather than risk me going outside.
You better preach, girl.
So
it's the same experience. Yes.
So that was how that worked. Yeah, so that was how that worked. Now, when it got to be a little later in the day, you could kind of venture out a little bit, but in like the summer sun at high noon kind of thing, oh no, we did not play those kinds of games. So I did get to go out, so I don't want to make it sound like I was just like on lockdown all summer. So I did get to go out at times, but it was very, very strategic. There wasn't a whole lot of just, although my friends, some of them could kind of go as they pleased, I certainly could not. My parents were very clear about where I was going. They would give me very specific periods of time I could be outside, a couple hours here and there. And when we moved to Baltimore from New Jersey, I could basically go out on the porch, because there at least was some protection from that god awful sun, you know. So that I could do. I could go out on the porch. I could go on my friends' porches. We could go outside when it got later in the day. So they were just trying to minimize the amount of time I might actually spend in the sun. So even with all of that, of course, I still got a little darker during the summer, and they would make comments about it, you know. They would call me like peanut butter colored by like August or whatever. But of course, when winter came and I was in the house, I would sort of fade back to my normal paler self, and they would be like openly relieved that, you know, I had reverted back yet again to a more acceptable complexion, and then summer would come again, and then we have to start the whole process again. So, okay. But yeah, but it's funny because even my other like lighter skinned friends had similar experiences where my parents really wouldn't let us go out a lot. But it seemed like my darker skinned friends, the ones that had the kids in my neighborhood who had the most liberty tend to be the darker skinned kids from where I sat. It seemed like they could kind of go more and be out more and play more and stuff, where there were very specific parameters around what I could do, partly because my parents were overprotected, but a lot of conversation was around just my skin color and me not getting dark.
How did that, you mentioned this in the book, but how did that affect your dating life?
Okay, well, there was not one for a long time. Yeah. It's funny. I always knew my dad was going to voice objections to dark-skinned boys. I always kind of knew it in the back of my head. I kind of just wanted him to say it and get it over with so we could just all get on with our lives, because I knew he he was going to have a problem with that. But he waited until I was in high school and was sort of having a little boy that I liked, that liked me. And my parents being very strict, there was no socializing with boys that they did not meet. So I explained to him that he would have to, you know, pass inspection at my house with my parents. And honestly, that scared away most boys for like a long time. They just were not trying to do that. And that was probably the best thing. But he actually agreed. So he actually wore a tie, a knit tie that was all the rage at the time, and a button-down shirt. And he was very respectful. And my dad, you know, asked all the questions, you know, and like displayed his collection of hunting knives for some reason at the dinner table. And, you know, just kind of laid out for him what, you know, if you're going to take my daughter out, she needs to be back by this time. We need to know where you're going, and da 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 da, and all the things. And he agreed to abide by all this stuff. But this was a very dark-skinned boy. And my dad allowed it for a couple of months, but I think at some point it was just more than he could stand, because he actually made a comment. He called the young man an ink spot, which is a really, really old school, back in the day, country black term for a very dark-skinned black person. It's kind of along the lines of blue-black, an ink spot. And I didn't quite know what an ink spot was, but I kind of like contextually figured it out. I'm like, an ink spot. Oh. So fortunately, by the time my dad voiced some objections to the boy, he and I were kind of drifting apart anyway. So it kind of worked out. But the next boy was an ink spot too, because I think by that time I had just made a commitment to myself to just make this as difficult as possible. So the next boy was an ink spot, and of course they didn't like him either. Then I went and lost my mind and found like not only an ink spot, but an ink spot with very hardcore militant Pan-African parents who had given all the kids African names, and they all wore like dreadlocks before I even knew what that was. So I just decided, I just kind of went a little bit crazy, and they really didn't like him. They actually banned him from the house. So so that made my dating life kind of odd. And I think what was the saddest part for me, I didn't realize it at the time, was I think I did get to a point where I was just kind of choosing guys that my dad would object to, instead of choosing guys that I liked. Not to say I disliked these guys, but the fact that they were dark skinned kind of gave them a little extra something for me that I could kind of like, with, you know, which, you know, wasn't necessarily the best thing. But I was a teenager, and I was doing the best I could to figure that out and to just figure out who I was. Eventually, though, I got to be in 12th grade, and senior prom was coming around, and I really wanted to go to prom. So I found a very caramel colored boy that I knew would fall into like the color scheme my dad could live with. So I presented him as the prom date, and they let me go to prom.
Okay. So, given all of these experiences that you have had with different people, I have a question from the chat as to whether or not you've ever met any of these people who have openly discriminated against you because of your color later on in life, particularly the Towson roommate. Have you come across them again and had any different conversations, or?
Okay. People ask about the Towson roommate quite a bit specifically, especially in these days where, you know, social media makes it really easy to reconnect with people, whether you want to or not. I have not come across her, and she has not ever contacted me. This was some years ago. I would imagine by now she may have married and all those types of things. Would I want to reach out to her or have a conversation with her? I don't know. I don't have to, because I kind of I instinctually, and I could be wrong, and maybe she'll pop up one day and prove me wrong. I feel like she experienced our interaction very differently than me. I think for her, it was just a thing that happened when she was in school. I don't think she really saw it as a particularly impactful experience. When I started packing to move out of the dorm, she really didn't say anything. She didn't ask why I was leaving or if I was okay or anything. And I didn't offer up anything. So I just left, and that was just kind of the end of our relationship. Would I go to look for her? No. Would I sort of put her on blast or put her name out there? I would not, because she was 18. First time she was away from home. I certainly would not want to publicly have to explain things I said or decisions I made when I was 18. That I just don't think that would be cool. If she wanted to have a private conversation, I certainly would welcome that. But I just, for myself, I'm not gonna I need to find, this person, and she used to live here, and, if you find her, bring her to me so I can have it. No, because like I said, she was 18. Yeah. I was 18. I would not, I kind of feel sorry for some of the young folks who kind of come up in this social media times where just every moment of your existence is documented in some way. I am thankful for the absence of documentation of a lot of my life, in that way. So, if an opportunity organically presented itself for us to talk, that'd be fine. If the talk didn't have what I would call a positive outcome, that'd be fine too. But I'm not going to go hunt her down and, bring her to the town square or anything like that.
Thank God for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is true. Some of the decisions that we make as teenagers or as young children because of how we're influenced, it's hard to deal with that later on in life because you were really a different person,
Yeah.
And besides apologizing for who you were or for not knowing what you know now, what can you really do, besides acknowledge that, yes, I was wrong, or I wasn't being very thoughtful or whatever, but I am working towards being a better person than I was 20 some years ago.
Right.
So I'm glad that you said that, because that's important for us to remember, that when we, who we were as kids or who we were 20 years ago is not necessarily who we are now.
Yeah.
I have another question from the chat. Do you have any ideas about the consequences of using skin lighteners, skin bleaching, or hair straightening products? What are the effects of that over long term? I can tell you with the hair what it is. Straighten your hair too long, but a lot of people straighten their hair with heat, and even a lot of white people straighten their hair with heat and chemicals, to make it straight, because of course you always want what you don't have.
Of course.
But what happens over a course of time from using these products?
Okay. It's funny, when I became an adult, that was the first time I realized that everybody straightens their hair, because I think Black people just think white people just have straight hair. No, they really don't. They do lots of things to keep their hair straight, As far as chemical straightening of the hair, definitely a rite of passage in the Black community for women. At some point you go and you get a perm. That's kind of usually, at least when I was growing up, that was a sign that it was kind of a sign you were approaching womanhood, when it was time to not sit in the kitchen with the pressing comb and actually go to a salon and get your hair done. That was kind of a big deal. I remember very well. It's actually in the book, the first time when I was allowed to relax my hair. As far as the damage over time, it certainly does damage your hair, even when you have a stylist who is skillful in the use of chemicals. Just over years and years, and in some, I certainly know Black women who have not seen their natural hair texture since they were 12 or 13 years old. Mm. And that certainly does damage your hair over time. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of data around those long-term effects because there are not a lot of African-American people in the research side of the medical community who would care to do that kind of research on that sort of thing. There is a lot, and I actually tell you a story about how I know that. There's a lot of anecdotal information that says that hair straighteners, chemical straighteners, have some connection to fibroid tumors for African-American women. There's a lot of anecdotal information around that. Fibroids are pretty much unheard of in white women, but in African-American women, you just find them a lot. And like I said, a lot of anecdotal stuff around, there might be some connection between the chemicals in the hair and that. There also is a lot of anecdotal information around African-American women who are hairstylists who find they have issues with their lungs from breathing in those chemicals for years and years and years of being hairstylists. Again, anecdotal, I used to work at Hopkins School of Nursing. In my day job, I work in development and fundraising. So part of my job was to help nursing students who were on the research side of things get grant money to do the research they were doing. Typically from NIH, that was kind of the big funder for that research. So there was a group of 5 African-American nursing students, all women, who wanted to do some actual research around the connection between fibroid tumors and the chemicals in hair straighteners. They had a ton of very well-documented anecdotal research, but that was all they had. So they wanted to go get a grant. Okay, so I sat down with them. We started talking about what the grant would look like and what they would need to do and all the information they would need to lay out. These were Hopkins students, and they were going to need Black women to participate in their studies. So there was going to be a huge hill to climb around getting trust from that community to participate in those studies. So we had to have some very frank conversations about how were they prepared to put their faces on the research project personally to gain trust to get research participants. They were very highly committed. So we go to NIH. I won't bore you with the process that one has to go through to get approval, but they did not get approved. The reason they did not get approved was because the governing committee that made the final say said not a large enough number of women would have been impacted by the results of the study. As it would happen, the governing committee was a committee of 28 white men. The youngest one, because I looked them up because I was mad, the youngest one was 52. No disrespect to any white man who was 52. But the point is that they just really didn't get it. Along the same lines with skin bleaching creams, there is a little more research there, but there's definitely a lot of anecdotal information that talks about how people who use it over long periods of time develop like severe, fast-moving skin cancers, and eventually it kind of takes off layers of your skin over time. So definitely does a great deal of damage. And even on the packaging for these skin bleaching creams, you're supposed to use it in very small localized areas, and not what a lot of these people do is literally slather it all over themselves, you know. But again, that kind of sort of ties in with racism, because there aren't necessarily enough people with power and influence in the medical community to really investigate these things. They just kind of go on.
It's interesting and sad and painful to hear that, you know, the pressure can be such that people will put their health and in danger for just the opportunity to look a little bit different. Because I certainly know people who have used skin lightening agents. So yeah. It is a big deal. And I've heard, again, you said anecdotally that it is a big deal in South Africa.
Yes.
Particularly the skin bleaching business.
Yes. Definitely huge in the Caribbean, in Indian communities. A lot of times they, for women who are going the very traditional route where the family may be involved with a matchmaker to help them pursue a husband, there is a whole lot of conversation around how do you present a darker skinned Indian woman, because they prefer to have lighter skinned women, and how does that affect the bride price and that kind of thing. So it's tremendously pervasive, and all of this because the idea that lighter skin and straighter hair are the pathway to a better life. I know for my dad, one of his biggest concerns for me was my safety, like my physical safety, because he'd grown up in a small coal mining town. He'd seen a lot of women deal with a whole lot of horrible things, some of them I don't even mention in the book, including his, things that happened to his own mother. He wanted me to be physically safe. He felt that the best way for that to happen was for me to travel a very particular route in life that would mean me sort of being more white. And he thought that would keep me safe.
Understood. In a lot of ways, was right.
Yeah, in a lot of ways he was.
We're coming to the end of our time, Ms. Petula.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wanted to wrap up and then give it back to Leah for a second. But what did you want us to take away from this? What, if you could summarize all, I mean, I know that's a big project to ask you to do, but what would you like us to take?
Oh, I thought I could. Okay, this is, I guess, the first thing. And this is something I learned from white people that bought my book. There is such a huge part for non-Black people to pay in the dismantling of all of this. There's only so much we really can do amongst ourselves, Black people typically can't arrange their lives so that they don't have to be around white people. It's just not possible. We need jobs. We, need loans from the bank for cars and homes. We just can't really set up our lives up that way. Many white people can set up their lives so that if they can kind of arrange things just right, they don't necessarily really have to get themselves involved in these types of things. So I appreciate all of you for kind of volunteering to kind of dig into this, because you certainly could arrange your lives, I'm making a big presumption there, so that you don't have to. So I appreciate you volunteering. Having said that, I think for me, just the absence of awareness that these things are happening is what I find most troubling. I guess, it's very easy for all of us to just kind of get insulated in our little world and our lives and our cares, and to not necessarily spend a lot of intentional time thinking about what else is happening in the world besides what's happening to me personally. And am I so caught up in what's happening to me personally that I'm negatively impacting the rest of the world in some way? I think that's important. I think that's important for all of us to try to figure out. So I guess for the big thing, for all of us to kind of step out of our personal stuff and look at the bigger picture, and look at how what we think and what we do and the choices we make, how does that impact the bigger picture? Beyond that, I think for Black people specifically, I know it is tremendously difficult to show compassion to each other sometimes. I get it. I really, really do. Black people get on my nerves sometimes. I swear they do. They do. But we really just have to remember everything that we're up against, and just, some compassion for each other would be really, really, really helpful. It would be tremendously helpful. I think if we could start from compassion, just in a general sense, and just fine tune what that means for how we act individually and how we treat other people and what we do in the world, that'd be a good place to start, I think.
Amen to that. Kindness for everybody. Just put it out there in the world. So I'm going to turn it over to Miss Leah. But I want to say my personal thank you again. I'm so excited, and I will definitely be telling everyone about your book.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. And
Thank
thank you all for coming and the great questions. That was really, really good. I enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, Tula. Thank you so much. You brought such wisdom and reality for this that so many of us, we women, experience. It's women of color and women, period. We have so many dynamics. And guys, you too. We understand it. Layla, my sister Layla. Oh my goodness, my girl. I am so, so, so proud of you. You have just done an amazing job of facilitating. We love you here at Govans so much.
Thank you so much.
And the fact that you call me Miss Leah is not going to make me at all feel weird that I'm old. Okay. But I get it. My mother would have killed me if I would talk to a 55-year-old woman and didn't say Miss Leah. So I get it. And Tula, you have to come back. We'll figure this out. You have to come back. You're absolutely wonderful.
Okay.
I mean, what you are is real, and I think we needed that today.
I would love to, because the one thing I really feel like I'd love to dig into a little bit more is we sort of brushed up against how women in particular and how beauty as currency kind of plays into this. So if we were ever to do this again, I'd love to just talk about that.
Well, you know, this is a speaker series, my brothers and sisters. So we should very much focus on that. I think all of us, you know, have felt the angst of being women and all these different definitions of beauty and everything. So we'll definitely, and speaking of speaker series, you guys, this is the launch of our racial justice speaker series here at Govans. And we're so excited and so happy. And we thank you. Do I hear a roar from the crowd? Yeah, I do. I do. Excuse me, my brothers and sisters. We are so happy. And we're so happy that Petula, you launched us out, and we could have done better. We could have done better. So everyone, make sure, if you are a visitor, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is Govans Presbyterian, and we are a welcoming church, and you are welcome to join us every Sunday as well. And make sure you fill out the visitor form. The link is in the thingy, the chat. Okay.
That's a technical term, the thingy.
The thingy. Does my brilliance not impress all of you?
Yeah.
So thank you so much. And I'm going to turn it over to our pastor, Pastor Tom, before we say goodbye for a few words.
Oh, thank you, Leah. And thank you so much, Petula, for being here. It was really fantastic.
Well, thank you for having me.
I so appreciated your personal testimony and your self-reflection and your insight and everything you had to share. I learned a lot, and everybody else did. Thank you also to Lila for an amazing moderating. You did a fantastic job. Thank you for doing that.
And I call you Layla, so
Lila, yeah.
I got it right now. I got it. But adore you.
Thank you.
Just to reiterate what's already been said, if you want to fill out the visitor form, do that. Stay tuned for a lot more programming on the speaker series, the committees and working groups that are being formed, all sorts of great things coming up. So thank you, everybody, for being here, and have a wonderful, wonderful Saturday. Go Ravens.